All right. Good Monday morning, everyone. I hope you guys are staying warm, dry, wherever you are. You don't have storms or anything like that. Here in Texas, it is cold, rainy, potential of snow and ice, depending on what part of Texas you live in. So just be safe out there, everybody. But you guys listening to Author Talk with me, Amy Russell Fern, and our lovely guest today is Michael Hingson, or Hingson. So you guys, my weekend has been insane, and I have decided that I'm going to just dive into it with you guys. So if I am not as energetic as I usually am, I was up till 4 a.m. with my daughter who had the stomach bug. She waited for my husband to go out of town yesterday to get it. So I'm single parenting it, and my youngest was up at 7:30. So it's been, a lack of sleep day for Amy. But you guys, just like deep gutted my house this weekend and like got rid of a bunch of baby stuff that, I don't have babies anymore. So I just like deep cleaned and did all of that this weekend.
You better store that for the next 15.
No, Russell, just no. Yes, good morning, you guys. Good morning, everybody. But I'm going to live vicariously through all of you guys for what you guys did this weekend. So what all did you guys have going on this weekend?
So I guess I'll go first. I was exhausted because last week I drove my RV from Atlanta to Houston in one day through tornado weather all the way from Mississippi. Got business done. And then Friday drove it 18 hours back from Houston to Atlanta where I am. And I've had like a traveler's hangover all weekend.
Oh.
And by the way, it is rainy and cold here too. It's the same storm all the way across.
It's just not fun. I don't like the cold. Rain is good in doses, but not in my backyard. My backyard, we have like that clay soil. So it's just like a swamp, so the dogs are just covered in mud all the time. It's just awful. It's just awful. But Fern, what did you do this weekend?
So I tried to work on my book. And I started getting this horrible cough and started getting kind of the stomach bug that apparently Meadow has. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it hit over here and it was pretty unpleasant. And so I just pretty much spent it just, being sick. It was kind of not cool at all.
So we're just three duds.
Pretty much. It's been a horribly rainy and nasty kind of weekend and week, so hopefully it all picks up a little bit. But it's rainy here, and this morning we already had like a little mini power outage, so who knows if we will last through the program.
Oh, I'm sure we'll make it. It's it's Monday, you guys. It's Author Talk. It's the best day of the week, at least in my opinion. So, Michael, what did you do this weekend?
Well, I don't want to be a downer, but my wife passed away in November of 2022, 15 days before our 40th wedding anniversary. And one of the things that, and I know we're going to talk about this, but I, in my book, Thunderdog, which was a New York Times bestseller, we talked about Karen a fair amount. And so as I announced in November to people that she had passed, a lot of people said, well, we didn't know Karen, but we got to know her by reading Thunderdog. And so it gave me the idea that although we had a small family service for Karen earlier this month, we ought to do something online. So I announced to everyone who I knew and could that we would do an online celebration of life on Saturday at 11 a.m. my time. And we did. And 55 people showed up, and we got to talk about Karen, talk about all the things that she meant to people, a lot of her quilting friends, because she's been a quilter since 1994. And so they came, and people who are with Accessibility, the company I work for, came, and a lot of old friends from both of ours joined us. So 55 people came, and we spent an hour and a half talking about Karen. And then yesterday, our local restaurant club here in Spring Valley Lake, part of Victorville, California, had a brunch, and I and niece and nephew and their kids came, and we all pigged out on lunch, and I came back and didn't do a lot the rest of the day.
Hey, there you go. When you're just so stuffed, you don't want to do anything. And sometimes that's, the highlight and the best feeling, I would say. But I think that, your Saturday event was an amazing event because
It
you
was.
really were, you know, going through the memories and celebrating Karen. And so that's not a downer by any means. I think everyone's life should be celebrated and you should remember the good times and the memories. And so I think that that's awesome that you had so many people attend and that felt like they knew her from your book, which is a New York Times bestseller. And I cannot wait to dive into it. I have heard the story from Mickey and I have ordered your book to read. So I am very excited to talk about your book this morning. But I know that if we don't mention our podcasting channels, I'm going to get the evil eye from Russell over here. So Russell, tell us about our podcasting channel.
Well, Mike, we were surprised last year that we were informed that we're top 10 independent book podcast in America. A few people watch us on Monday Live, but most people listen to us during the week.
He cut out. Most people listen to us during the week on our podcasting channels, but we do it live so you guys can see us and are animated. And, you know, I am very much one that cannot control their facial expressions, but control what comes out of my mouth. So it's entertaining to watch. So you guys can go over to our Facebook group, our LinkedIn profiles, or on YouTube and follow or subscribe to if you want to watch us. But we are available on all of the podcasting channels. That's, you know, Good Pods, Amazon Music, Google, Apple, all of those. Anywhere that you can honestly find a podcast is where you can listen to us. And we are very humbled and grateful. We are in our 8th year. We just got our 8th year. Russell, I saw your video from our very first podcast that we did 8 years ago that you shared. So it's a celebratory time for Author Talk, I would say.
It really is. And I am just amazed that we have people like Mike here to speak to us about his book. It looks like the storm in Atlanta is knocking me off. So if I disappear, it's not because I choose to.
It's all good. We'll just keep bringing you on. It ain't. You have done this for 8 years. We've got this, you guys. We can do this. We can do this. But I want to dive in, Michael, to your book. So I'm going to kick that on over to Fern, and she's going to start talking to you about your book. So take it away, Fern.
So, Michael, your book is fascinating. I mean, the topic, of course, of the seeing eye dogs, and you know how. I mean, I'm a big dog fanatic. I love dogs. Mine don't do any work at all. They're just lazy buns. But yours does work. Your doggo has a job. Tell us a little bit about like Rosalie and you know how you met her, and you know the whole book, the new book that you're promoting is about her puppyhood. And so talk to us a little bit about puppyhood with a seeing eye dog that is a serious puppy.
So actually, to be technical, she is not seeing eye dog. She's a guide dog. And what the difference is that Seeing Eye, like Coke, is a brand. The Seeing Eye is a school in New Jersey. So Seeing Eye dogs are part of the category of animals known as guide dogs. And Roselle comes from Guide Dogs for the Blind in San Rafael. She was my 5th guide. And so she is actually a guide dog. It's interesting. I lived in New Jersey for 6 years, and when I was back there, more people called them guide dogs than seeing eye dogs. But everywhere else in the world, people call them seeing eye dogs. But Seeing Eye is a school in New Jersey. So just to point out that difference. So Roselle and I met when she was roughly 2 years old, a little bit less than that. And we met at Guide Dogs for the Blind. And I went to train with her. Let me tell you what a guide dog does and what a guide dog does not do, because it's important. People are so under the wrong impression about blindness and blind people. You think that if you don't have eyesight, you can't do things. In fact, when I was born and it was discovered I was blind, the doctors told my parents that no blind child could ever grow up to do anything in society and I should be sent away. And that attitude is more pervasive today than we would like to believe. The unemployment rate among employable blind people in this country is between 65 and 70%, not because we can't work, but because people won't give us the same opportunity they give to people who can see. Same thing with a guide dog. The guide dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely. The dog doesn't know where I want to go, and the dog doesn't know how I want to get there. And I don't want the dog to know that. That's my job. How do I know that? Well, how do you all know what you do? Well, you've got signs and other things. And I have a lot of cues and information that I use. And now a lot more technology starts to catch up to the technology you have. And I say it that way because the reality is you all have as much a disability as I do. You don't recognize it, but you do. You're light dependent. If the lights go out, we're talking about power failures. If the lights go out and you're in the dark, you run for a smartphone, a flashlight, a candle, or something to bring light back. Your disability is covered by the fact that lights are so pervasive. But the fact of the matter is you are just as much a person with a disability as I, but technology has covered it up. Give me the same opportunity, okay? And the reality is that there is more technology coming that helps me, like talking GPS systems, like smartphones that now talk, because if they weren't made to talk, the manufacturers would be sued because they were not making the technology accessible. Excuse me, but it still gets to be a real challenge because people don't view us the same. The dog's job, as I said, is to make sure I walk safely so we don't fall off a cliff or walk off a curb unintentionally or anything like that. So when I met Roselle, she was described as a feisty little pixie. She liked to steal socks. She didn't chew them up, she hid them. And she did that to both me and my wife on more than one occasion. But she was just a very loving creature and so committed and dedicated to doing her job. She liked a lot of praise. She liked to please. And she made sure that we walked safely and effectively wherever we went. She looked to me to give her directions, when to turn left, when to turn right, and so on. And that was what my job was. And I had learned to do that starting with my first guide dog when I was 14 back in 1964. Oh, now you know how old I am. And we've been doing it ever since. And so that's kind of a little bit of the story. And you'd mentioned the book about running with Roselle, which was really written more for kids, which is not so new anymore, but it is the latest one that's published. We are working on a third one called A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave, which is going to talk about fear and controlling fear, because it was something that I utilized when we were dealing with September 11th, and I know we're going to get to that. So that's another one coming up.
And see, I think that's just adorable. I mean, you know, that because you think about these dogs and they're so serious, they have this very important job, but you also don't see the side of the playful dog, you know, like you're talking about how she would steal the socks. And they're dogs, right? They are just like any other doggy who wants to be playful and loving to their owner. And yet when I imagine that the moment you put the harness on her, and she knows that it's time to get serious and time to do her job. Do you find that these dogs, you know, enjoy the same kind of stuff that, I mean, do you guys walk together all the time? So do you have like the same kind of rapport that you would with any other dog, I would imagine?
Well, I think that other people and their dogs should have the same kind of rapport that we do. And unfortunately, all too often they don't. Roselle, my current guide dog Alamo, and all of my 8 guide dogs and I have had a very close teamwork rapport. I describe it as kind of like SEAL Team 6 or any close-knit team of people or creatures who work together regularly. The fact is that we have learned to work so closely together that we really do understand how each other thinks and how each other is feeling. The relationship is extremely close. There are rules even around the house. So Alamo today knows you don't jump up on furniture. On the other hand, if I'm sitting on the floor, Alamo knows you can jump up on Mike, and does. He thinks he's a lap dog. But there are rules. At the same time, when the harness is off, as you pointed out, the dog does get to be more playful and relax and be like a dog. when we're out walking and people come up and say, "Oh, can I pet your dog?" I'll usually say no, because the dog is in harness and is working. If, however, I have time, I will stop and take the harness off and say, "Now you can pet the dog." And because they need to relax, and I know that. I've had a couple of times that people have come up and they've said, "Can I pet your dog?" And I just said, "No, not right now." They go right ahead and pet the dog. And the dog reacts to that because they really like the attention. They're not going to bite or anything like that. They love to get petted. But when I sense that, I will correct the dog. And I've had somebody say to me, for example, "Oh, you shouldn't yell at the dog. I was the one petting the dog." And I said, "No, you don't understand. The dog knows better. You got the dog in trouble. I'm going to deal with her or him first, and then I'll deal with you. I told you you shouldn't pet the dog. Now you see why you shouldn't, because you got the dog in trouble." It's a very close relationship, and we both understand what that relationship is all about. As I said, we're a team, and we work together in so many different ways on so many different levels. And other people with their dogs really ought to learn some of the same things. Things like set rules for the dog. Don't feed the dog from the table. Don't let the dog get away with anything. They're only doing that because they want attention, and they want you as the pack leader. If we go by Cesar Milano's The Dog Whisperer rules, they want the pack leader to set the rules. They want you to tell them what you expect, and they will do it. They love to please. And the fact is that you can have a very close relationship with your dog if you set up appropriate teaming relationships. So that's what we do. We also have a cat. The dog and the cat like each other a lot. They know what they're both not supposed to do. And our dog doesn't chase the cat. Alamo doesn't chase the cats or the cat. They work well together. But the rules are pretty firm and should be. So when the harness does come off, they do get to work. In Thunderdog, we wrote a section called Guide Dog Wisdom. And one of the 10 elements of Guide Dog Wisdom is all about when the harness goes on, it's time to work. When the harness comes off, it's time to play. And the dog does know the difference.
So we have lost Fern, though she may be back because we're all having these storm problems, Mike. So what is the book Thunderdog about?
Well, so my story is that in 1999, I was hired by a company to open an office for them in New York City. I was hired by Quantum Corporation to open an office and hire a sales force, work with service technicians that we also hired, and run a facility selling computer equipment primarily, but not exclusively, to Wall Street. We opened the office on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center, and the office actually opened its doors in that facility on August 1st of 2000. When I first started working in the World Trade Center, and long after I started working, I would walk around the complex, and even did it not with Roselle at first, but rather with a cane. I use a white cane as well. Most blind people use a long white cane. The dog is not superior to a white cane. The dog is different than a white cane, but the white cane is the most basic tool that we use, if you will. It's like a pen and paper as opposed to a computer. They sort of do the same thing, and one is a short process of what the other does. But with a cane, I find a lot of things that the dog would just automatically go around, like kiosks in the middle of the floor in the World Trade Center where people are selling things and so on, where Roselle would just go around them. I find them with the cane. I get to interact with the people there, learn what they do a lot more exploring. So I did that. And I also did it with the dogs. And part of the reason for doing it with the dogs was so that they would not get in the habit of going one way to get anywhere, because I didn't want them to do that. That got to be a challenge after a while because there are only so many ways you can go in the World Trade Center. But we opened the office, and of course, I suppose it sort of goes without saying that we were there on September 11th, 2001, when the terrorists attacked the complex. When we did, there were people in my office with me, and they started getting scared. We had guests. We were going to be teaching people, our reseller partners, how to sell our products. And I, when things started to happen, was trying to calm people down. People saw fire outside of our complex. They saw fire up in the tower above us, and there were pieces of paper, burning paper falling outside our window. And I was telling people to be calm, slow down. And one of them said, "You don't understand, you can't see it." The big line, as I put it. The problem wasn't what I wasn't seeing. The problem was what they weren't seeing. That is, they weren't seeing a dog sitting next to me, wagging her tail, yawning, going, "Who woke me up?" Not exhibiting fear at all. And I knew what Roselle was like when she was afraid, but she wasn't sensing anything that caused her to panic or be afraid, which told me that whatever was going on wasn't such an imminent danger that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly way. Eyesight had nothing to do with it. And the reality is, none of us knew what happened at that time. We didn't learn till later that 2 aircraft had been deliberately crashed into the towers. But anyway, I finally got people to focus. I got a colleague of mine, David Frank, who would come in to help with the training from our corporate office. He was responsible for pricing for resellers and so on. I got him to take guests to the stairs. I told him, don't let them take elevators, because I had learned from the emergency preparedness, fire protection people and the Port Authority police, in case especially of fire, but emergencies, don't let people take elevators because fire could get into the elevator shafts, which it did. And so David got them to the stairs. I called my wife. I told her that something had happened, that we were leaving, and I didn't have more details. David came back. We went to the stairs and we started down. And almost immediately I smelled an odor that was familiar to me, but it took me 4 floors to place it as the fumes from burning jet fuel. And when I observed that to others around me, they said, "Yeah, that's what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane." But again, I emphasize, nobody knew what happened. Reporters even today say, "Well, of course, you didn't know, you couldn't see it." The last time I checked, Superman and X-ray vision were fictitious. I again say, nobody knew. It didn't take a lack of eyesight not to know. We were 18 floors below where the plane hit on the other side of the building. Of course, nobody knew. Anyway, we did make it down. We got out, and Thunderdog tells that story chapter by chapter. And every chapter starts out with an event from that day. And then we go back into my life talking about training and lessons I learned that helped on that day. And then we come back to the World Trade Center for the end of the chapter. And then we go on to the next chapter. So it's the story of that day, but it's the story also of my life. It's the story of Karen, and it's the story of Roselle, and how we worked together, how we interacted, and the lessons that we learned and used that day to escape and survive and help other people survive to get out of the complex.
So what was one of the stories, stories that you had learned in life as a lesson that you and Roselle used, and of the event that you used it to help people get down those stairs?
Well, so one of the examples would be exactly what I just said, which is that I observed how Roselle was behaving, and by her actions, I knew that we weren't in such imminent danger that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly way. Could that have changed? You bet. But you can only go by the data that you have. I knew what was going on outside because people were yelling about it. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our window. The building's on fire above us. And that was all anyone knew. And that's all anyone knew on my side of the building, much less just in my office. So I had learned to work with a dog, to trust the dog as the dog trusted me. So when we got to the stairs and started down, I was encouraging her, "Good girl, Roselle. What a good dog. Keep going. What a good dog." I needed to do that because I didn't want Roselle to be looking back at me, "Are you really okay?" I wanted her to know that I was okay and I was confident. It's a circular, synergistic kind of thing. So me encouraging her and telling her essentially through my tone of voice, "I'm okay," and her continuing to guide and do exactly what she was supposed to do when her tail was going. She was telling me she's okay. So we worked together. We had situations where people started to panic on the stairs. My friend David, who was with me, and we had gotten, as I said earlier, he had gotten the others in our office to the stairs and started them down. Then When David came back, we swept the offices and we went to the stairs and started down. At the 50th floor, David said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And I just snapped at him. And I'll tell you why in a second. I have a master's degree in physics from the University of California at Irvine, and I also got my secondary teaching credential at the same time. And I love to tease and say, during my work getting a teaching credential, I took that secret course called Voice 101, How to Yell at Students, you know. And so I snapped at David and I said, "Stop it, David. If Rosella and I can go down these stairs, so can you." And he told me that that brought him out of his funk. He said that later. And what he said he wanted to do was to walk a floor below me and shout up to me whatever he saw on the stairs. Did I need David to do that? No. Would it have made a difference? You know, whatever's going on is going on. That's my mental mindset. But I said, okay. So I got down to the 49th floor and he was already at 48. And he's going, "Mike, everything's okay here on the 48th floor," going down the stairs. And he did that all the way down the stairs. Why do I mention it? Because even though he was just trying to keep his mind off of what was going on, not knowing what was going on really, what David was doing by shouting up to me, "Hey, Mike, we're at the 44th floor at the Port Authority cafeteria, not stopping, going on down," and doing that all the way down the stairs, David became a focal point for everyone on the stairs who could hear him. He gave anyone within the sound of his voice something to focus on, to say, "I'm doing okay. And you got to know that where I am, we're okay here." He gave, I would say, thousands of people a voice that they could hear who said, "We're okay." Meanwhile, I was praising Roselle and walking with Roselle, and people told me later they followed us down the stairs because if I was being so focused and calm, they'd just follow me and we'd be okay. So it's all about teamwork, and it's all about using the skills that you have. And it's all about learning to control fear, not saying fear doesn't exist, but you can use it as a powerful motivator, which is part of what our new book will be about. Learning that even in the most adverse circumstances, you can control your fear, you can use it as a motivator and as a way to keep your senses heightened, but that you don't have to allow that fear to blind you or paralyze you in any way, that you can continue to make strong and positive decisions about whatever's going on. And if something happens that's worse than you expect, you know, what can you do? You can't control everything, and you shouldn't worry about what you can't control. Focus on what you can and deal with that, and the rest will take care of itself as much as it can.
That's beautiful what you just said. So, Amy, you have something?
Oh, I just have a question because I'm listening to everything that you're saying, and then I know your story, and it, in the press release that your publicist sent, Roselle was just as calm, kind of guiding everyone down the stairs, and you were saying how that was kind of calming for everyone that was around in a focal point, yelling out what floor you're on and that it's all good and stuff. But I really am just curious to know, I'm sure it was like instinctual to just kind of trust Roselle and to remain calm. But when you have something, like 9/11 going on, sometimes it seems like that could just go out the window. So is that just like you just flipped a switch and you're like, okay, I'm just going to trust Roselle and we're going to do this and I'm going to let her guide me in the direction that we need to go for safety? Or what kind of was that process like?
Go back to what I said. It's a team effort because she trusted me as well. We have to work as a team. It isn't just trusting her. The point is that she continued to guide as I continued to encourage and praise her and did my part to keep the team calm. So if suddenly Roselle did something that I didn't expect, then I would know she's sensing something that I'm not sensing, and we need to pay attention to that. Now, that didn't happen as we went down the stairs. But again, go back to what I said. It's both. It's a mutual relationship. It's a team effort. So we both had to trust each other, and other people followed us because they saw that our team was working well together. And the result of the team working well together is that we were going down the stairs and we weren't exhibiting fear. Does that mean I wasn't afraid? No, it doesn't mean that. But we weren't exhibiting fear because I had established a mindset by all that I knew about what to do in the World Trade Center. I had established a mindset that said, focus on what you can, and the rest will take care of itself. Use the tools that you have in your toolbox to keep yourself from panicking. And in reality, there is only one time on that day that I probably came anywhere close to panic. And that was later when we were like about 100 yards away from Tower 2 when it started to collapse and everyone started running and I turned and ran. David had already run off. We caught up to each other, but I turned and ran, and I remember saying, God, I can't believe you got us out of a building just to have it then fall on us. And it didn't fall on us. And there's more to that story in Thunderdog. But the reality is that it isn't a matter of just trusting and everything is going to be okay, Amy. It's more a matter of the team worked well together, and I was monitoring Roselle every step of the way in case suddenly she did something that I didn't expect. And at the same time, she was clearly listening to me. And if I started to sound afraid or different in some way, then that would cause her to react differently, probably look more at me. Are you really okay? Or what's going on? So it's a team effort. It isn't just a one-sided thing. And again, remember, Roselle, every step of the way is waiting for my direction. So we get to a bottom of a flight of stairs, and I had to tell her, go left to get around to the next flight of stairs, and then say forward to go down the stairs. It's a team effort, and we each had a job to do. And on that day, we both did the job really well, and it worked out, and we survived.
So what was the, pivotal moment where you decided that you wanted to write your story and Roselle's story into a novel?
Well, it's a memoir. It's not a novel. But what we did was in 2002, I had met at that time the publisher of the American Kennel Club Gazette, George Berger, who suggested it. And I started making notes and so on. And it just didn't totally come together until 2010 when I was called by a woman named Susie Flory. Susie was writing a book called Dog Tales. It was going to be 17 chapters, each chapter about a dog and things that they did that were unique. And she wanted to include Roselle, but once I told her my story, by the way, she did publish Dog Tales and Roselle is in it, but she said, you ought to write a book. And she said, I'll help. I know an agent. And that started a process where we took my 1.2 megabytes of notes and we crafted it into a book. And then it went to her agent, who became my agent, Chip McGregor, who liked what he saw. And he was able to negotiate a contract with Thomas Nelson Publishing, the largest publisher of Christian books that is now part of HarperCollins. And so on August 1st, 2011, Thunderdog was officially published and available to the world. And that same week, it was the first of 13 weeks where it was on the New York Times bestseller list.
And what made you decide to write the second book?
I wanted to write something that would be more relevant for children. So it wasn't going to be a picture book, but we wrote Running with Roselle. I worked with a children's author, Jeanette Hanscom. So we wrote a book for kids, although more adults buy it than children, actually. But it talked more about my life growing up and Roselle's life, and then how we met each other and joined forces. So there isn't nearly as much about September 11th, but it's a detailed story of the two of us and the different things that we learned along the way and how we learned to work together. And again, it's a story that really talks about teamwork. And it talks about the fact that blindness isn't really the difficulty that we face. The real problem is the lack of education and misunderstandings that people have about what it means to be blind. And just because I use a guide dog to help get around, that's no different than you guys having lit signs or other things that you use to help you get around. It's just a different way of doing the same thing. And that's one of the messages that we try to convey in both books, but especially in Running with Roselle. And we talk a lot about some of the technologies that we have available to us now. It's evolved a lot since Running with Roselle was published in 2014. A lot more things with talking GPS and other things. But even in Running with Roselle, there's a chapter called Blind People Have the Coolest Toys. So we talk some about the technology in there.
So I think you're right, Mike. I think that I don't understand some of the points that you're making either. And listening to you talk about it confronts me with some of my ignorance. I didn't understand how this viewpoint of yours about it's just different. I, I'm glad that I'm glad that you're a messenger of that. And I would like to read the Roselle book. I would like to hear the book about you growing up. So I'm one of those adults that might buy your kid's book.
Well, I hope that you'll get both of them. One of the things, and I should say, we started a podcast a year and a half ago called Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. The unexpected is the more fun part of it. But one of the things that we do from time to time get to talk about that is the whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And people usually, when they talk about DEI, leave out disabilities, which is really part of what we do get to talk about occasionally. And that's also why I say inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected, because diversity's already thrown out disabilities. When you ask any of the so-called experts on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, what it is, they don't mention disabilities. Or they'll say, oh, man, that comes in the equity part. Balderdash. There are 25% of all people in the United States, according to the CDC, who have some sort of a disability as we define it. What we're trying to get people to understand is that disability does not mean a lack of ability, which is why I also say that every sighted person has a disability as well. You've just been able to cover it up because Thomas Edison and others invented things like the electric light bulb that allow you to cover it up. But make no mistake, you still got it. So we all have disabilities, but a disability doesn't mean a lack of ability. A disability is a characteristic. And my version of that happens to be that I'm blind. Your version of it is that you happen to be sighted, but you can hide it mostly because you have access to electric lights and so on. Don't mitigate me just because I use different kinds of technologies, just because I use Braille to read and write. Teachers of the so-called blind and low vision students today say, well, Braille's outmoded because people can listen to books on computers and other things like that. If that really is true, then why do sighted kids still have to learn to read print? Why don't we just let them watch cartoons? Blind people's way of communicating, reading, and writing is Braille, period. And everyone should learn Braille. Even students who have some eyesight should learn Braille because they'll read with Braille faster than they ever can read with print. And they can read longer with Braille than they can read with print. We've got to get beyond this whole idea of how people traditionally view this so-called thing of disability. I don't have a better term. Differently abled is a bunch of bunk. I'm not differently abled. My brain works the same as yours. I use different techniques. And I'm not blind or visually impaired. Visually impaired is also such a misnomer. And it helps to continue to promote the lack of education of what blind people can do. First of all, visually, I'm not different just because I'm blind. And I'm not impaired because I'm blind. It's more appropriate to talk about blind or low vision. But even people who have low vision should learn the techniques that blind people use, like working with a white cane. I won't say a dog so much because most blind people don't use a dog, they use a cane, or low vision people. But the dog does, for those people who use it, really teaches them how to trust and rely on working with a partner. But blind and low vision is a much more appropriate thing to use. But again, disability isn't the problem. It's our perception and the fact that we've got to get beyond thinking that just because someone has a so-called disability, that they have a lack of ability. And I'll never use the term disabled. That's true of politicians in Washington. That's not true of me. So, the fact of the matter is disability does not mean a lack of ability. All it means is it's a characteristic, and it's something that in one way or another, every single person on the planet has.
So what's your next step, your next book?
Well, we're working on a Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave, doing the podcast. I work for a company called Accessibe. It's an Israeli company, Accessibe. And what Accessibe does is it makes products that help make internet websites more inclusive. It mitigates a lot of the things that go or don't go into websites today. 98% of all websites don't do anything, and the website owners don't do anything to make sure that their websites are completely accessible to all sorts of persons with disabilities, whether it's blind or hearing impaired. See, that's the wrong term. For a person who is deaf, it isn't going to be deaf or hearing impaired. They'll beat you up if you say hearing impaired. It's deaf or hard of hearing. So we should use that same term. So people who are deaf or hard of hearing need to be able to have captioning. Blind people need to be able to have links labeled on websites, pictures described, audio descriptions of videos that come on websites, any number of different things. People who are persons with epilepsy need to be able to, when they encounter a website with a blinking element, turn off the blinking element so that they don't get thrown into a seizure. And Accessibe makes products to help make a lot of that happen. It isn't a perfect solution. It uses artificial intelligence. Before we started the show, we were talking about Chat GPT. Another form of AI is what Accessibe uses to make websites a lot more effective for persons with disabilities. It's not a perfect solution, and so some things have to be programmed. But for $500 a year for a website under 1,000 pages, Accessibe will make most of what needs to be done to make a website accessible actually work, and people are in a much better position to use websites as a result. So we talk about that. I get to talk with people about the fact that, again, it's not disability, it's our perception, and it's our obligation to recognize that making a website fully accessible is part of the cost of doing business and should be.
Amy?
Well, I was just going, I know that we're running out of time. So I was going to thank you, Michael, for coming and talking with us today and for sharing your story, yours and Roselle's story, and what all you have coming, because I think you can impact people by telling your story. I'm a huge advocate for that. And for authors, I think the world would be such a boring place without authors.
Yes.
And everything like that. So I am just incredibly honored and grateful that you came to talk with us today on Author Talk and that you did tell your story, because I think it is an important one. And I think it just can make a difference and inspire people in every avenue of life, no matter what they're going through. And I am not a writer myself. I'm not an author. I just work with them, but I live vicariously through you guys. And I know to write a memoir, especially one, involving 9/11 and you being a part of it, I can only imagine how therapeutic and difficult that was to write. And so I cannot wait. I have ordered it. I cannot wait to read it. And I will definitely leave you a review. I'm an advocate that that's the greatest thing that you can do for any author is to leave them a review. But you definitely deserve to be a New York Times bestseller. So we're just grateful and honored that you joined us today. So thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to come and talk with me, Russell, and Fern.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I hope people will listen to Unstoppable Mindset. We're not competing with you, so I figure it's okay to talk about it, but we hope that people will, because they'll learn more about not only me and they'll learn more about themselves. Next week, we are going to be holding our 100th episode. So we're having a lot of fun with it. And I hope people will join. So again, and it's available wherever podcasts are around. So hopefully people will listen to it and that they will get Thunderdog. And if people want to reach out to me, they can go to my website, MichaelHingson, HINGSON.com, or www.accessibe.com. And I mention accessibe.com because if you go there, you can actually do a free audit of your website and find out how accessible it really is and find out how much you can do quickly to make it more accessible and inclusive. But thank you for letting me come on and asking me to do so. This has been fun. And I hope we get to do it more in the future.
Oh, absolutely. absolutely. And I will definitely be listening to your podcast. You are free to talk about your books, podcasts, anything that we have. We enjoy the conversation and promoting authors and all of the things that they're doing. So I will definitely tune into your podcast. I'm huge on mindset and everything, inspiration, everything like that. I feel like it's a very powerful subject.
Well,
so
we'll just have to have you on the podcast.
I would love to come and talk with you. It has been so much fun. But you guys, we hope you all have a great rest of your Monday. Stay warm and dry and safe, everybody. But until next week, bye for now.